Hey, welcome to Encounter Grace, where we help thinking Christians think clearly. I'm Jason McKnight, and I'm here in the studio with Justin Tillman, and we're glad you've joined us today. Justin, aren't you glad they're here?
I'm very glad they're here.
Otherwise, we'd just be talking to each other, and it's just a staff meeting.
That's right.
Well, this episode and the next episode, we're going to tackle a topic that really no one wants to talk about publicly, the hidden scourge, the plague of the 21st century, as a friend of mine just said last week or the week before, and it's the porn epidemic. And so you've clicked on this because you saw the title. We're glad you did, because it is an epidemic, and it's not a good thing. The thing about an epidemic is you don't want that infecting, but we're really, all of us, in a battle in our culture and in our bodies. And what we want to do over this part and the next part, these two parts, two episodes, is we want to understand the battle, and then we want to learn how we can win more of the battles that we're with. So let me encourage you right now to like and subscribe and share this. Send this to someone that it will help. Send it to more than one person, because we trust by God's grace it will help everyone who hears it. We're not just up here putting words on out into the Ethernet. We really believe that God wants to lead people through this battle, and we've got some great stuff for us. So as we learn about the issue and the struggle, we're also going to learn about pathways out. And Justin, you're the one that drew the short straw.
Yeah, I did.
You've done all the research and all the help. And actually, though, there's some reasons you're involved with people, helping them. And we'd love to talk about this. So set the table for us. Tell us where we're going.
Yeah, so what I thought we'd do in this first episode is talk about the problem itself. Some people think this is something that we don't need to talk about. It's not really that big of a deal. So we want to talk about it is a big deal. It's not just something that is this maybe quiet little secret that you have. It's impacting you in ways that you may not even know. And then I want to talk about what's actually going on in our brain when we're accessing porn or looking at it, or compulsive behavior with it, all the stuff that goes along with that. Talk a little bit about the science behind it, because it's not just this video I'm watching or this picture I'm looking at or this thing I'm thinking about. And then we want to talk about the spiritual side of it. Why? What? Because we are spiritual beings. I heard somebody one time say we are embodied souls. And so, while yes, there's a physical part to us, this is also impacting you spiritually. And so today really is to set the table for why is it a problem? Why are we even doing 2 episodes on it? Why are we even mentioning this? So why is it a problem? And then hopefully give you a better understanding of that, and then set us up to talk about ways to freedom and lasting freedom, not just, well, I've nicked this for 3 months, or I'm 6 months and I've been great. How can we build lasting freedom in this area? Because it's eating our lunch. So.
Well, I love the way that people are talking now about sexual integrity versus sexual purity. We talked sexual purity growing up, and I think it's a wonderful thing, but also you never quite get there.
Yeah.
But sexual integrity seems to have it seems to be more invitational to me. Yeah. Because with purity, I mean, you're either white or you're black. Like you're either pure as the driven snow, or you're sullied.
Yeah.
And I know that I'm sullied. Well, with integrity, hey, it's a condition that's a little more trend versus checklist.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that. Anyway.
And I think too, with the purity concept, I mean, having grown up squarely in that purity culture, which again, there's a lot of things I appreciate from it. It seems so focused on the act of sex itself. Like, well, I'm just not going to have sex before I get married. And if I can commit to that, we don't really discuss everything else, as long as you don't cross that line. And so, the shifting to sexual integrity, I think, really broadens the playing field for what it is we're actually trying to accomplish.
Yeah, that's right. Well, let's talk about the problem. What's going on in our culture? What are the stats telling us? What is the condition?
Stats are telling us it's a big problem. We may think that, there aren't many people that struggle with this, or it's only a select few. The latest research coming out from Barna suggests that, or tells us that 61% of U.S. adults report consuming pornography. And that's 6 percentage points up from what it was in 2015, which was 55%.
Decade.
Yeah. So in one decade, we've gone up from 55% to 61% of U.S. adults. But I thought this was also interesting because we often think this is just a guy's problem, but it's not. There's a significant rise in female viewership too, with 44% of women now accessing pornographic content, and that's up from 39% a decade ago. So not just men are viewing this, women are also viewing it, and it's causing issues for them too. We're seeing addiction in women. We're seeing compulsive behavior in women. So it's no longer just this guys thing that is off to the corner and nobody talks about it. It's also we're losing women to this as well.
Well, at least it's different among Christians, right?
Surely I wish.
Christians. What?
The numbers are a little lower, but they're not what you would think they would be. So for Christians, over half, so 54% of practicing Christians admit to consuming pornography at least occasionally. And then within that group, 22% would say they engage with it weekly or daily. So about 15% would say weekly, about 7% would say daily.
Wow.
So yeah, it's if you look at that, 61%, and then 54%, the gap is not as big as you would hope.
Yeah, seeing as we have the Spirit in us. Now yeah. So there is some less frequency, but the gap is way narrower than we would like or even expect. Yeah. So the other problem is not only do we have a prevalence of this in society and in the church, but I was really struck by this. 84% of porn users indicate that no one is helping them avoid it. Wow.
84%.
And struggling in silence.
Yes, nobody knows and nobody's helping them. Or at least maybe somebody might know, but nobody's helping them.
Yep.
But then this one, so about 50% of those individuals say that no one even knows.
Right.
So about half of them haven't even told somebody, and 84% of folks that are using may have told somebody, but at least nobody's helping them. Nobody's stepping in to say, hey, how can I walk with you through this? How can I come alongside you? And there's a lot of reasons for that, whether it's shame or just not knowing what to do, or but I think that sets the stage for us that this is a problem. It is not an isolated event. It is. I mean, when you think about those numbers, 54% of practicing Christians admit to consuming it at least occasionally. That means on any given Sunday, when you're sitting in church, 1 out of 2 people in that congregation have consumed it or are actively consuming it, or at least have some occasionality of consumption of pornographic material. That's unreal. And so on one hand, it's shocking, but on the other hand, I share that because of the secrecy stats. Like, don't think that you're alone. You're not. We'll talk about this later, what the enemy wants to do with that, but you're not alone. So not only, yes, we want to have, I want folks to have the shock factor of those numbers, but I also want them to understand, I'm not the only one.
Well, and if 84% of porn users have no one helping them avoid it, and if 50% of porn users say no one even knows that they themselves are struggling, I mean, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit for help.
Yeah.
Like if, episodes like this and then friends like us, there's a lot of room for God to do a lot more if we would just let someone into our struggle or equip people to help others in their struggle. Yeah. Which is what we're doing.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the reasons there's so much secrecy is because oftentimes there's this shame that comes with it.
Oh, it's the shame for sure.
And, if my friend knew, or if my wife knew, or if my girlfriend knew, or my boyfriend knew, if they knew, they'd leave me or they wouldn't want to be around me. And I can't guarantee you that answer is not true. But what I can say is that you're not alone. Like there are enough people around you who are probably struggling with it or have struggled with it and have some level of recovery maybe, where we have to stop not addressing the elephant literally the statistical elephant that is in the room, because it is killing our brothers and sisters around us. And I mean, if we're being honest, it may even be killing us. Like it is just, again, it's the elephant in the room that we often don't address, and it's time to stop throwing the blanket over top and avoiding it.
Yep, that's good. Well, now that we know it's there, what is it doing to us? So when someone engages in habitual porn, or even just in occasional, you've learned a lot and talked a lot and shared a lot with me and with others about what's going on in our brains. I remember easily 15 years ago reading William Struther's book, Wired for Intimacy, one of the early works on what porn does to a male brain, specifically male brain.
Okay.
And it's fun to hear what you're about to tell us and help us, because we are wired for intimacy.
Yeah.
I mean, God's got a great computer up there.
He really does. The human brain is fascinating in and of itself, but you've probably heard of some of the words we're going to use today, like dopamine and neuroplasticity and all those big fancy 50-cent words. But those are the things that are at play. So all dopamine is it's the neurotransmitter or the brain chemical that's associated with pleasure and reward. So when you eat a piece of candy, you get a dopamine hit off of that. And that's why you go back and get another piece of candy. If you do something fun or it's fun to you, you get a dopamine hit off of it. So pornography hijacks that system, where it taps into that system. And the reason it does that is because when we think about pornography, like, sex is created by God. It is His idea in the first place. So I love the title of that book, we are wired for intimacy. We are wired, we are sexual beings, and that's not caught God by surprise. So, but this is stuff that the enemy is using, that the world uses, that our flesh uses to hijack what God has created and twist it. So pornography actually triggers that dopamine release in our head. So it's just like getting a piece of candy, just like doing something fun. And that release, what that's designed to do is reinforce that behavior. And so it feels really good.
Right.
So I want to do that again. And I want to do that again because I just love that hit of dopamine, which is why you get folks who are addicted to skydiving or addicted to exercise.
Yep.
Yeah. So, it's reinforced by that brain chemical dopamine. The problem is that over time, our brains get used to that. They get used to those high hits, those high levels. And so what happens is your brain adapts to it. And so with increased porn usage, your brain adapts to that high level of dopamine in your system. And so what it does is it gets used to it and it says, hey, that's not as pleasurable as it used to be.
Yeah.
I'm not feeling, I mean, when you're here, let's say you're at a level 1 and it spikes to level 4, you feel that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you're at 4 all the time and then you spike to a 5, well, that doesn't really feel that different. So now I need a 6 or 7 or an 8. And then when I get used to 7 or 8, I need a 10 or an 11 to get that same gap, that same feeling. So it hijacks that dopamine system and our brains begin to adapt to that. And so that's what feeds that compulsive behavior, because now I want that same feeling, but I need more, and I need more.
This might not be an appropriate comparison, but it's what you hear of when someone does heroin and they're always trying to chase their first high.
It's a perfect comparison.
Can never get to that again.
It's the same stuff going on in your brain that's happening during substance abuse. It's the same thing. So that is a perfect comparison of you're always chasing that first high. And
and this is not heroin. Porn is not heroin.
No,
but that idea.
But I think if you're going to beat it, you almost have to think of it as an addiction to a substance, because you have to use some of those same principles to recover from it.
Well, before we go to prolonged exposure and what happens there, let's talk about early exposure. It feels like this could be a good time when we talk about the brain's reward system adapting and requiring increased stimulation. Is that going to be even more jacked up the younger you are?
Absolutely. So you think about, and we talked about on here before when we talk about joy or gratitude or things like that, the younger you are, your brain is still developing. So it's very susceptible to these spikes in brain chemicals. So a brain that's still developing has a much greater tendency to adapt to these high dopamine hits than a brain that's already pretty developed.
Right.
Which is talking about, heroin and other substances, which is one of the reasons that there's a big push for kids to not start smoking.
Right.
Because their brains are so much more susceptible to addiction and nicotine. The same thing's happening here with pornography. They're so susceptible to those high dopamine hits, and that becoming their default or their neutral, to where the rest of their life, they may wrestle with getting that same feeling from an actual romantic relationship or a friendship or whatever it might be.
Well, and it's like with why pediatricians are saying, not for porn, but for brain development, they're saying do not put screens in preschoolers' hands, except for very little amount. And it's not because we're worried about the content they'll see. It's because the development of their brain, we're gonna sidetrack it the more they're looking at an iPad or a phone.
Yeah,
and it's just not as helpful.
Yeah, and it's not that we don't want our kids to enjoy things.
No, absolutely not. It's that we want them to.
Yeah, I heard someone say one time, and I thought it was a very helpful way of thinking about it. Porn is like candy for the brain. So I can eat all the candy I want, but I'm not going to grow. I'm not going to be healthy because there's no protein in it. It's not actually helping me grow. Actual relationship is the protein, the physical connection with somebody else. That relationship is the protein that will actually grow my brain into better behavior control, better emotional regulation. Porn is just a candy. So it's not actually doing anything for me. So we want our kids to enjoy things, but we want to enjoy the right things so that their brains are growing and developing in healthy ways that set them up for success and flourishing in the future.
Okay, so of course, early exposure is bad. And I mean, I think that's why as parents, we're so careful with, we don't just let the kids have the remote control. We don't just let the kids go to anyone's house anymore.
Yeah.
You just don't know what's on the airwaves or what's coming into that home or, whatever the older brother is going to let their kids see on the phone or whatever, blah, blah, blah. We want to be very careful from early exposure. We're going to see as we talk that we're not dooming anyone because God's grace and power are more powerful than sin and the fall. But it is a call right here to be careful as parents, just to be careful about not giving a foothold to your kids for this kind of stuff too young. Parenting inside the funnel, basically.
And not to totally scare parents, but typically that's when exposure happens is early on. At least for people nowadays, it's usually in that 11 to 17 time frame. So, I mean, it's not to scare parents and be like, oh my gosh, if I'm not vigilant, they're going to get sucked into something that's going to ruin their entire life. All we're just saying is just be a good parent. Just be intentional. Just be thinking about this stuff. You can't protect them from everything, but that doesn't mean you don't try to protect them from as much as possible.
Well, I'm 52 and I have friends my age or within 5 years of me, and they have stories of 7 years old when I first saw porn. We're not talking screens at that point.
Yeah.
We're talking magazines or whatever. 7, 8, 10, 12, 14, and all of this is called early exposure.
Yep.
But even for people as old as me, who my kids, we're empty nesters now, this matters, the wiring of the brain from early exposure.
Yeah. Well, and so, I mean, so many stories that I have heard that it's almost seen for young boys as a rite of passage in a way. And it's like, we got to kick that out of the window. Like it's not, this is not a good thing. It is a legit trauma to a young brain. When we talk about, different types of trauma, it is a legit traumatic experience for that young brain because it's not developed to handle it. So,
well, let's go on to more bad news.
Yeah, let's keep going
from early exposure.
Keep the spiral down.
Let's. I mean, why don't you share with us a little bit of the impacts, the neurological or brain impacts of prolonged exposure?
Yeah.
What does that mean, and then what are the impacts?
Yeah. So it's not just chemical issues that we're dealing with. We're also starting to see potential structural changes in the brain. So
wait a minute. First, what do you mean when you say prolonged exposure?
So when it becomes that habit. So when that dopamine, when the dopamine system has been hijacked and now it's become a habit. So folks with compulsive pornography use may actually experience a reduction in gray matter in their brain. And that's the stuff that's involved with motivation and decision making. And when those changes happen, they have the potential to actually impair cognitive function, emotional regulation, their ability to make sound decisions. So you may actually start to see in people who have compulsive pornographic addiction tendencies towards ADHD or depression or intense anxiety, or a whole gamut of emotions, because the parts of their brain that actually help regulate that aren't growing and may actually be shrinking a little bit.
Right.
So,
right. Wow. And it's not that ADHD or anxiety only come from
no,
prolonged
absolutely
exposure,
not.
but the fact is you can find that. Okay, good.
Yeah.
What else? Structural changes.
So a little
gray
bit,
matter. I need all the gray matter.
you need all the gray matter you can get. So don't do anything to make it go away. But functional changes, the prolonged exposure can actually alter the brain's neural pathways so that it strengthens that association between viewing explicit content and sexual arousal. So what we mean there is if your pornography viewing becomes habitual or compulsive or addictive or long-term, it can actually make it challenging for you to have real life intimate relationships, because the living person in front of you may not actually do anything for you because your brain has been conditioned to only be aroused by explicit material.
Yep. Wow. So the pathways, the neural pathways, and also the gray matter. Gray matter is the structure that's there. The neural pathways are the functions of how your brain works. Both of those are getting jacked up with prolonged exposure. Wow.
So we're not out of the woods yet.
Come on. Give me some good news.
Yeah, I want to kind of be like Paul in Romans 1, where I paint it just as black as possible before we give you the good news.
And there is good news in the Lord.
There is. So I encourage, if you're listening to this, please make a plan to listen to part 2.
Yeah. And put us on 1.5 so it goes fast.
That's right. So when this also escalates. So we talked a little bit about it when we talk about adapting to the dopamine hit. Your brain can become desensitized. So what used to maybe give you that dopamine hit actually doesn't give it to you anymore. Right, so you need something new. You need novel content, more extreme content to get that same spike. So you've got escalation, then you've got relationships are impacted by this. It can distort your understanding of what healthy sexuality looks like. Yeah, give you unrealistic expectations about what your what sex is like. If especially for young men and women who aren't married, it can give you unrealistic expectations of what marriage is going to be like, and set you up for failure at the very beginning. There's so many. It's not just something that you're doing in the privacy of your bedroom or the privacy of your home. It is also impacting the way that you're showing up in the world and in the relationships around you. That's really tough to think about. Yeah, that is really tough to think about, the impact on relationships. Yeah, and just really think about people carrying that burden because they were exposed at 12, or because they, a guy's locker room or a girl's locker room maybe now, but just in high school, and now you're going down a road, and now it's just tougher. Well, even tougher to relate to people or relate to the person God has for you. Yeah, even if you take the brain changes out of the mix, just the shame factor. Yeah. I mean, good, solid relationships are built on a level of transparency and vulnerability. So even if you take all the other stuff out of the mix, if I've got this thing that I'm holding on to that I feel like I can't share with you because it's going to change the way you think about me, our relationship is only going to go so deep, because there's always going to be this corner of my life or my soul or my heart that I'm not going to let you into. And so the enemy will then use that to say, well, they don't really know you. So if they did know everything about you, they only like what they know about you. If they knew everything, they wouldn't like you. Boy, that's tough. And so it starts this downward spiral that keeps you stuck in it. Wow. So real quick, I did want to talk about trying to quit, because a lot of people say, well, I can stop this whenever I want to. My first statement to them is, well, try and let me know how that goes for you. Because you see the same type of withdrawal symptoms. And you really can do something for a day or two or a week or two. Like you really can do. You can. Let's. What does quitting really mean? Yeah, and sometimes people will say, "Well, I haven't looked at it in a week. I'm doing really, really good. I'm out it. I've beat it." You're right. Okay. Let me call me next week. Let's talk about how it went, or let me know the first time you have a bad weekend. Call me and let me know how it goes. But you see the same type of withdrawal symptoms that you would see with any other substance. So irritability, mood swings, anxiety, intense cravings. So all of a sudden it just, you might feel like, well, this is something I can manage. The minute you go to stop it, you're like, oh my goodness, that's all I think about. AA calls it a dry drunk. I'm not physically drinking, but that's all I can think about is my next drink. So you'll see that here. And that can make it really hard to stop, and is what often leads to the relapse. And it's also hard because we'll talk about this more in the second episode when we talk about the pathway out. But the underlying problem for a lot of folks who are using pornography is some sort of emotional wound, some sort of negative experience. And somebody's listening probably going, well, I was never abused or anything like that. Just listen to the next episode and see if you don't hear some things that resonate with you. But it's often being used as a coping mechanism. So if we don't actually address, we could stop watching all the porn we want to, but if we don't actually address the thing that's leading us to look at it, then we're much more susceptible to going back to it, or that addiction or compulsive behavior latching onto something else, because this is just a symptom of a deeper wound. It's a bad symptom and it's something we need to stop.
Yeah.
But we can't just stop it. Well, I've stopped looking at porn. Well, we need to do some deeper work on what are you trying to heal anyway? What are you trying to cover over that's hurting you? So,
yeah. Now, everyone struggles. Let's say this: every guy struggles with lust, but not every guy has sexual trauma in their past.
Yeah.
So just bridge that gap for me. So the wrestle with porn or with lust is different than the compulsive addictive-ish behavior
not
may
everybody
arise out of a trauma.
Exactly. Yeah, not everybody is going to be quote unquote addicted to porn. Any usage of it is not a good thing.
No, it's a struggle. I mean, I think just because it's so available, like it wouldn't be a struggle for people if it weren't so available in our phones, on our screens, and that's where we live now.
Yeah, and you can make the argument that some people have more addictive tendencies. There's lots of research into that. But yeah, so the emotional wound, it could have come from an actual sexual trauma growing up, but the emotional wound could have come just from not having a secure attachment to your mom or your dad, or not having that secure attachment growing up.
Gotcha.
And so, the enemy gets in there and plants lies in your mind of you're not valuable. People don't really like you, or you're not worth anything. And some people use pornography as their drug of choice.
Right.
Just like some people use alcohol to numb that stuff. So it doesn't have to be always attached to something horribly traumatic, but there often is a wound somewhere that we are trying to cover over. Even if it's just, we talk about trauma in an episode before, we might link to that one in the show notes for this, but the trauma of perception. If I don't feel like I'm measuring up to other people, that hurts. And so I want that to go away. So I might choose alcohol. I might choose pornography, something to numb me emotionally so I don't feel less than anymore. Or if I'm burnt out from perfectionism, those things. So it doesn't have to be some actual bad trauma that's happened to you.
Right.
But there's something that's hurting that you're trying to cover over with some sort of numbing agent. And the one we're talking about today is pornography.
Okay. Well, good.
Does that help?
That does help.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So
what's next? Where are we?
We're at the
I got all lost.
We're at the spiritual impact. And I think this probably goes a lot without saying, but our thought life matters to God. And He cares about every part of us. And so when we have these things, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, can I say this quote that I've heard someone here say, and I agree with it 100%, is our most important sex organ is our mind. And I never thought about that, but that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
And so in any battle for sexual integrity or sexual purity, our most important sex organ is our mind.
Yep.
It's won or lost there.
Yeah.
So let's go.
Well, and so, right off the bat, Matthew 5, when Jesus, this has probably come to most people's minds when we're talking about this. Matthew 5, 27 and 28. You've heard it said, you shall not commit adultery, but I tell you, if you look at a woman lustfully, you've already committed adultery in her heart. What Jesus is doing is he's addressing that thought life. He's saying, look, the action itself is bad, but even if you don't do the action, but in your heart, you desire to do it, or it's controlling you, you're no better off than the person who's actually physically done the act.
Yeah.
So your thought life matters.
Yeah.
The heart matters. We see throughout Scripture where Paul tells us to, Philippians 4:8, whatever's true, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, praiseworthy, all those things, put your mind on that.
Those are 8 great words.
Yeah.
true, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, excellent, praiseworthy. They are. You put your mind on those things, man.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot less gossip and bitterness and complaining.
Yeah. Well, our thought life matters.
Yeah, our thought life matters.
James 1:14, everyone's tempted when they're dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then that gives birth to sin, and sin gives birth to death. The sin starts in the mind, starts in the heart. It doesn't, by the time you see the action play out, you're on the tail end of the process. It starts in our mind, which is why he tells us in Romans, don't conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Solomon tells us in Proverbs 4, above all else, guard your heart, for everything flows from it. So the heart, our thoughts, our desires, they dictate our behavior. So if we don't have those guardrails, we're in trouble. And then another one that I think is particularly helpful, Ephesians 5:3. He says, but among you there must not even be a hint of sexual immorality or of any kind of impurity or of greed. These are improper for God's holy people. I think it's interesting. Paul says not even a hint. Like there shouldn't be even a whiff of this because it matters to God.
Yeah.
It matters to God. It's not the amount. It's if there's even a hint of it, that's a problem.
Yeah.
So you mentioned lust and love. They're two different things. Pornography fosters lust, which is a selfish desire. It objectifies whatever it's focused on. When you've got biblical love, which actually seeks genuine connection and selfless sacrifice. So pornography, lust, selfish desire.
Yeah.
Genuine love is selfless and self-sacrificing.
Right.
And genuine connection. So they are two very different things. And that's where we get to, one is the protein. That genuine love is the protein. The pornography is the candy that's not actually helping you.
Right.
It's setting you up just like regular sugar does for a lifetime of health impacts.
Yeah.
The candy of pornography is setting you up for a long-term mental health impacts. A couple other things, spiritual numbness. You know, just like your relationship with other people. If I've got this as a little dark secret of mine and I'm not going to share it with you, we're not going to go but so deep.
Yeah.
If I don't feel like I can share it with God, that relationship's not going to go but so far. And God already knows about it. But if we feel like I can't let him into that corner, well, then your relationship with the Lord is not going to go but so deep. So he's not going anywhere.
Yeah, it's not on him.
Yeah, he's not going anywhere, but you're going to feel like I can't go to him, or I can't pray to God until I've had at least a week of not looking at anything.
Yes.
Because I've prayed this prayer 1,000 times and he's just tired of hearing it. So I need to go this time with a little bit of a peace offering of, see, Lord, I did it for 7 days. Will you hear me now? And that's not at all how God is looking at us, but that's where the world, the flesh, the devil twist our mind to say, he doesn't want to hear from you. You know, you need to sit in this. And so when a week passes, or we don't even get to a week, we just end up cycling further down. And next thing we know, it's been months before we've prayed or since we've prayed.
And that verse, that image of Jesus, come to me, you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest because I'm gentle and lowly of heart.
Yeah.
Like we read that book, Gentle and Lowly, as elders. And that idea of come to me when you're burdened.
Yeah.
Don't wait till you're in a good place.
Yeah.
Come to me in the burden and I'll give you rest.
Yeah. Because if you wait till you're in a good place, you probably aren't going to come. Because you won't ever get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, there's the dark black picture. And my hope is that as folks are listening to this, they're itching for some sort of good news. Yeah. And I hope we've teed them up well, but I want us to see that, one, this is a big problem. And two, it's a big enough problem that we've got to stop being quiet about it. We've got to start to destigmatize it like we have with so many other things. Start destigmatizing it so that we can actually start talking to one another, because as we'll see in the next episode, that's going to be the way that we work ourselves out of this forest of sexual immorality or pornography or whatever it is. It's going to have to start with actually connecting with, because the lust and love thing, in order to push out lust, we've got to have genuine love, and genuine love requires openness, vulnerability, and conversation. So if we can't start doing that, we have no hope of ever working our way out of this forest of lust. So
yeah, that is very good. I was thinking of the verse you have written here in the notes, we demolish 2 Corinthians 10:5. We demolish arguments and every pretense that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. And that idea of taking captive the thoughts as they come in, taking them captive. Now, it's hard for me to take them captive because if you've ever tried to, let's say you've ever, I had to help a guy who ran a hobby farm, and he had to get the chickens in the coop every night. And you get one chicken in, and the next one squirts out, and so then you try to get that one in the first one. You got to get 30 of them in the chicken coop, and I'm not smart. I'm probably as dumb as a chicken, but anyway, try to get them there. And we can try to take captive every chicken. We can try to take captive every thought. But you know what? If there's two of us working it, it works a lot better. And if we can be in each other's lives, helping each other take captive, to the stuff we're going to talk about next time, is that together God brings more healing, more freedom, more progress on the path. And it just, I just can't do it alone. I just can't do it alone.
Well, there's something about that James principle of confessing our sins to one another, and we'll talk about that more in the next episode. But that's been my prayer is, I'm not immune to this stuff. It's part of my history and when I was younger. But Lord, can I be someone who, when somebody comes to me and says, hey, can I share something with you that maybe I haven't told anybody else? Lord, let me respond with the grace and the kindness that you have, because that's what's going to be there. Maybe that's the first time that they've let light in on whatever this thing is, if it's particularly pornography. And if that's if you're the first person they've ever told and they're letting the light in, that's a sacred responsibility that the Lord's given to you. And I don't want to squander that. I don't want any of us to squander that, because people, we need each other. We need to walk together through these things. And so that's my hope is with episodes like this and the other work that folks are doing, is that people will feel more and more open to saying, hey, help me. I'm stuck. Will you help me get out of this mud? So that's what we're called to do.
Yeah. And that's what God empowers us to do. So it will be fun to learn as we come back next time to see what are some pathways, what are some tools, what are some helps, what are some exercises, what are some doorways out of this dark room. Somebody, who is it that once said, what's conceived in the dark and kept in the dark has a hold on you until you bring it to light. So we've talked a lot about how dark things are. We've begun to talk about the change, but next time we're going to shine a whole bunch of light and see a whole bunch of integrity, purity, victory, and help in the journey for all of us.
This is the episode that's not fun to do. The next one's going to be fun because we're going to talk about the ways of just the joy of walking out and walking into freedom. So
and God has that for us. Well, Justin, thank you for teeing this up and for helping us. And everyone, thank you for joining us here on Encounter Grace. We are always trying to help thinking Christians think clearly. And this episode, I hope, send it to a few people. We all need to normalize this conversation if it's still sort of something that's shame-filled. We need to be in each other's battles and helping victory. So tee it up for the next one, and we can't wait to have you back next time.
Yeah.